Okay. Saqib, just for the record first, I know you must have
Yeah.
done this routine umpteen times, but how did the media bug bite you?
How did the media bug bite me?
Yeah.
Well, let's just say that it wasn't so much the media. I was always in love with cinema. So cinema was my first love. I guess cinema is one of the many elements in our modern day media. Um, and so that love for cinema ultimately brought me into the world of media via advertising and communications. And basically, I've been directing and producing commercials and then music videos for a very long time. And then in 2019, as you know, I made a movie. So yeah, it was that love of cinema when I was growing up, and just the excitement and the alternative reality of cinema. Uh, that kind of bit me at a very early age and kind of brought me into this whole world.
I like in all these years while you were growing up and you started with advertising and then music videos also, there was no cinema to talk about in Pakistan.
I wouldn't say that because um, we had cinema, a very active film industry while I was growing up in the 70s. Uh, then, with the advent of martial law and General Zia's time, which was around the late 70s, the industry took a huge kind of a dive because a lot of restrictions were placed on exhibition of films, censorship, production. So system that was already running that got completely stopped, and after that, we never really quite picked up steam. The Pakistani cinema continued to be made in one form or the other till till the early 2000s when it completely fell apart, and then of course the new foundations were laid via films like Khuda Ke Liye and all. So my kind of formative years, जो आप कहते हैं, which were your teen years or whatever, which were back in the 70s. So we had a very vibrant film culture, and every week there were Pakistani movies being released, international films being released in Pakistan. So even after, it's not just Pakistani cinema; it's just the world of cinema. That world never died. Right? You could watch it on your VCR. You could, you know, watch it on your whatever different mediums, phones, TVs, whatever. So वो तो एक चलता रहा था. But yes, the main kind of bug was the khatwal on the cinema seat. That got
Okay. And then you started with advertising. Um,
yeah.
was it at some level fulfilling your creative, desires or ambitions?
You know, I don't think advertising can ever really fulfill the creative ambitions of anyone because it's a really obnoxious place to be in. Because of course you have to cater to the whims and needs of clients and then the own hierarchy within that advertising agency. Luckily, I came in at a very interesting time in advertising. It was 1988. It was the end of martial law, and 1989 we had our first elections post. Yeah, so that those early years from the late 80s, early 90s was also the opening up of the Pakistani media and a new media culture evolving. So it was an exciting time because suddenly you could think a lot more freely than you could before. So I must say I came in at a good time. But you see, because someone like me who had love for cinema, I really didn't know how to go about making a film in those days. Because the film industry was relegated to the studios, the studio culture out of Lahore, which is called Lollywood. And their way of doing films was very somebody like me who had come from abroad. मुझे पता भी नहीं था कि I knew Sajad Kolat Avenue Studios was there, and there were people like Satish Anand from Ever Ready Pictures and all, but there was no system that could absorb people like me.
Right.
Unlike a system And nor did we have the media houses back then, nor did we have drama production houses. We just had PTV, a movie industry that was really hobbling, and advertising was the best place for people like me to join because the salaries were good. It was a more enlightened atmosphere. So yes, um, it was interesting for a while, but I would ultimately say that it's a good place to earn your bread and butter. But if you want to explore creatively, then that's not really going to happen in advertising.
And you also never did dramas. Television never fascinated you?
Well, because then I got so busy with advertising. Or television ka to ye tha na ke the television culture. I mean, I was so busy with making. I first worked in an advertising agency, where I was a creative manager, copywriter. Then I became a creative director. Then I went straight into production and direction of TV commercials. Then I got so busy with those through the 90s, and I mean for the last 30, whatever. Like let's say I started making commercials in 1993, so almost 28 years. I've been very very busy with that. तो फिर टाइम ही नहीं मिलता था. फिर ड्रामे का ये हो गया कि the drama industry itself has become not a great place to be because there are the way that industry is regulated, the structures within which it works are so restrictive. The payments are bad, the pressures are bad. Again, you're kind of on an assembly line doing things, little room. And most of the scripts that you have, some of them are good, most of them are very run of the mill. And nobody wants to take any chances. So, and you were so weighed down by commercial constraints now. तो मैंने कहा उससे बेहतर है कि मैं commercials ही करते रहूं, कम से कम पैसे तो अच्छे मिल रहे हैं. So I never really got into that, but then basically what a lot of us directors in the world of advertising did was we fulfilled our creative impulses by making music videos. So that sustained us for a long time. और फिर जब फिल्म का दौर शुरू हुआ तो सबने कहा कि चलो फिल्म बनाते हैं.
But I see that, sorry, please go ahead.
अब वो फिल्म का वो option जो है बड़ा limited हो गया है. So of course everybody wants to get onto the bandwagon of doing stuff for digital platforms. But of course that's also limited to us because we don't have access to the big digital platforms. तो अभी एक quandary में ही है.
अच्छा मुझे ये बताएं कि unlike a lot of your peers, you didn't sort of diss Lollywood completely ever. Even in your film, we see a great love and affection for the old school Lollywood. Why is that, and why do you think others like to disconnect from the legacy so much?
Well, the thing is, to each their own, but I think Lollywood had never really gotten a lot of respect from your intelligentsia or your younger generations, or so-called serious filmmakers, because a lot of my contemporaries never grew up with Pakistani cinema. They never saw it, so they don't remember that experience of going to the cinemas in their early years and what an important world that was. I mean, how important Pakistani cinema was. It was called a film. It was called the film industry. We were churning out over 100 films a year. There were cinemas, multiple cinemas in every neighborhood. शहर का कोई भी एरिया जो था वो अपने सिनेमा घर की तरफ से पहचाना जाता था. ये रीगल चौक है, ये ये area, everything was, the cinema was the center of that community and all commercial activity hub was around.
Even in Islamabad, Melody Cinema was an institution,
और उसके इर्द-गिर्द सब कुछ था.
Yeah.
तो मसला ये है कि I grew up with that because it's not that my parents are very avid film goers, they weren't, but I just developed an interest because my grandmother used to love going to the cinema. और मैं जब कराची उनके पास जाता था गर्मियों की छुट्टियों में, so that was an activity. But coming back to your point, a lot of my contemporaries never really saw Pakistani cinema. Then when they saw Pakistani cinema, they just couldn't relate to the themes or also the style of execution. Because हमारे यहाँ बड़ी dichotomy आ गई थी by the 70s के TV की जो दुनिया है, that is the world of realism, that is the world of sophistication, that is the world of the kind of bourgeois educated world of way of telling a story. Filmmaking is fantasy, film is crass, film is for the public. तो ऑब्वियसली जो हमारे फिल्म तो पढ़ाई नहीं जाती थी उस दौर में, तो लोग ये समझते थे कि टीवी का जो रियलिस्टिक मोड है या रियलिस्टिक नहीं भी है, बट वो तरीका कार सही है. एनीथिंग विद सॉन्ग एंड डांस एंड वायलेंस एंड ऑल दिस फैंटेसी इज जस्ट अ जोक, इट्स crass and it's only very recently that actually Lollywood or even in India Bollywood has become cool. अब आप जाएंगे तो मीम्स बनते हैं, मीम्स कहते हैं, मेमीज कहते हैं, I don't even know
Memes, right.
memes are. And the icon of Mola Jat has become popular and people will love truck art, and suddenly people think Lollywood is cool and Anjuman is cool and those posters are cool, and it's like, yo man, बहुत cool हो गया. But for the longest time people didn't think that. And those people who went and studied film abroad, उनको तो फिर वही बताया जाता था ना कि कुरुसावा है या फिर मखमल बाफ है या फिर Wells hai, that is world cinema. Nobody appreciated our own storytelling choices. I've always been very against that snobbery because I think there's a certain privilege that comes with that position of running down your own authentic ways of communication, and cinema comes in one of those. And remember, हमारा सिनेमा जो है, that's part of subcontinental cinema. ऐसे ही नहीं कि कुछ भी नहीं है. Subcontinental cinema comes from a world of Nautanki and theatre that was there in the early part of the 20th century. फिर उससे आपका सिनेमा आगे आया, and song and dance and music to express emotion has been a very integral part of that tradition. तो ये सारी चीजें हमारे सिनेमा में आई और इसका बाकायदा एक बैकग्राउंड है. So now that people have, seen so much stuff around the world, and Bollywood, of course, the Indian film industry, of course, has helped it also because वो इतनी क्या कहते हैं ubiquitous है, हर जगह उसका इतना पावर हो गया. तो उसकी वजह से फिर हम लोगों ने भी अपना सिनेमा रिस्पेक्ट किया. Sorry.
No worries, no worries.
My phone is like losing its position. Okay, sorry. तो वो हमारा वो है. So that's why a lot of people still don't give respect to that form of cinema. When I decided to make my first film, I very much wanted it to be both an ode or what's the word for it? When you give somebody जब आप उसका help me out with that
homage to.
Yeah, homage. Yes. To our cinema and the cinema I grew up with. But at the same time, the challenge was that it could exactly be that film. क्योंकि आज की जो audiences जो 600-700 रुपए लेके सिनेमा हॉल जाएंगी, वो एक 90s की फिल्म नहीं देखना चाहेंगे. So the trick was to somehow make it relevant to today's audiences and accessible. The film language should be accessible to today's audience. So it should seem like a modern film that is paying an homage to that cinema. So you use a lot of the tropes of that cinema, kind of presented in a couched in the language of today's film, so that people understand it. But ultimately, it was a human story, and the film, of course, as you know, was about the film industry, and it's about a cultural moment in the life of our film industry, or in the life of our national kind of lives, where one world is going and a new world is coming in. And that one world was called Lollywood, and the new world is this world of young people coming with different experiences, different narratives, different way of telling stories. And here is a character who was perched in the middle, who was so relevant in that world and no longer relevant in this world. So it was a story about that conflict, basically.
No, yeah, the premise was great, but मैं ये पूछूंगा आपसे कि फिर आर्ट हाउस टाइप फिल्म क्यों नहीं बनाई? इतना डेप्थ है उसके अंदर, द होल ट्रांजिशन बिटवीन टू कल्चर्स एंड टू generations, I would say.
Because art house film, um, uh, actually, I believe it or not, at some levels, Baji is an art house film because um, those who क्या कहते हैं, who have seen it found it so different than everything else they had been seeing. So for them, ironically, it was art house because it's the way I had approached the characters and the way one had approached, just the storytelling may have been like the way it was in the 90s, मगर आज की audiences के लिए वो different थी। इसलिए बहुत सारे लोगों ने मुझे बोला कि बड़े अरसे के बाद हमें फिल्म देखने को मिली है। हमें I didn't feel like it was a
A
TV drama,
drama. Yeah.
perhaps because it is, and that conscious क्या कहते हैं, embrace of those cliches. It kind of became art house. But at the same time, I wanted the film also to be accessible to everyone. I wasn't interested in making a piece of communication that only some people would like. So I basically, it was a very difficult tightrope to walk. Okay, the film should reach out to the masses, and it should also reach out to your more urban, more discerning, so to say, film audiences.
Right.
So, and I love song and dance. I love the tropes of a commercial cinema. And I wanted to take ownership for it. And why the hell not?
Right, right.
So
But
I did.
Yeah. Even in Baji, did you have to make any compromises because you were the producer and director?
Not really, because only I could have made that film as a producer. Nobody would have financed that film. For the very simple reason that एक तो जो फिल्में in vogue थी for box office, which are buddy films or coming of age films or romantic dramas or romantic comedies. Baji was none of that.
Right.
That's why Baji is a house film, at least as far as Pakistan is concerned. It was a film in which the two protagonists were females. It was an ensemble cast film. It was not a youth-oriented film, though it had those elements. It had, very, again, like I said, because the two protagonists were females, it also had a female-centric storyline. And then had a cast which was, very different. And nobody was in the film because of their box office value. Everybody was in the film because I thought they would fit those roles perfectly. So if I wanted to make a film that was thematically different, with a cast that was a big question mark. लोग कहते हैं मीरा को कास्ट कर रहे हैं यार, मीरा तो 90s की एक्ट्रेस है, उसने तो कोई हिट ही नहीं दी है 20 साल से, और what big risk. And then Amna Elias, and it's again wasn't a big commercial name, though an excellent actor, of course, and Usman Khalid Butt and Ali Kazmi and Mohsin Abbas, great actors, but of course not the Humayun Saids or the Fawad Khans. So the only way I could have made this film was by producing it myself. So then I really wanted to just make it the way I wanted to. Yes, I ultimately, because मेरी पहली film थी, I realized that there were many things that I had to learn. It was like a house job in the hospital. You learned a lot of things while in the process of making the film, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But no, there was no compromise. I made the film the way I wanted to make it. Yes, I would have made it possibly more open in terms of certain themes, but obviously because I was making the film for a larger audience, I had to be a little careful. I mean, particularly some of the kind of, I don't know if I can say it. I don't know how the Chinese react to, but some of the more like the gay undercurrents in the film, both in terms of the relationship between Meera and Amna Ilyas, the characters they played, as well as the Mayyar Ijaz, Mohsin Abbas thing. I had to tame that down because I thought I can only give a hint of that. So that was I had to be a little careful while dealing with some of those themes. Baki, so then I just did what I wanted to, like.
So actually, you covered my next question, which was going to be, in hindsight, would you change anything about Baji?
Yes, I would. What I would change about Baji now is that I think there are certain things that I think would make it a better film, for sure. And those better things are, I think the first half worked well. I think the second half, the film got a little removed from the core conflict, which was of the two women, and it got to be a slightly, it threw a slightly wider net and the territory of kind of film noir and thriller territory. But when we were making that film, it was a conscious decision because, हमारे यहाँ interval होता है. That's not the way it is in the West. And interval means that you come back and you're actually almost watching a new film while taking in the past. So that's also a trope of our history of cinema. The first half is one thing and the second half is the second thing. So he said, in order to keep the second half interesting, you have to take it into new territories. If I was making this film as an art house film without interval, so maybe this would have been a 1 hour, 10-minute film and treated very differently. But because I was making it for cinema, and I was making it for as big an audience as I could, keeping in mind, a certain sophistication. तो उसके लिए फिर ये करना पड़ा.
Right.
I had to. So I would have just sorry, I lost my train of thought. You can edit this, right?
I can, of course. Yeah.
Jay. So basically, I would work a little more on the screenplay, for sure. I would also relook at the editing of the film, because we spent a lot of time in the editing of the film. I edited a lot of scenes. When it was subplots here, but I would still look at the editing of the film. But beyond that, I'm very happy and I own the film, because if there was a first film that I wanted to make, this was it. It was kind of me. It came from here.
And do you think that film also, sort of defines your signature style of cinema that you will produce in future if you make more films? Or are you going to do completely something different? As an artist, what do you crave for? More of Baji, yeah, completely different kind of film? Sorry, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, so I was asking.
So I'm coming to that. So it's just like every actor has a persona. Every director, I think, has a certain style or has certain themes that director constantly grapples with, or you will see the appearance of those themes over and over again. Now, genre may be different. Sometimes the style of filmmaking may be very different, but you will see those themes recurring. And whether it's Truffaut, whether it's Hitchcock, or whether it's Truffaut, whether it's Hitchcock, or whether it's Kurosawa, or whether it's whoever it is.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm putting myself in that, God forbid, but kuch themes aapki aayenge. So I have a feeling that whatever I do, even if a story is told in a very different way, I will be dealing with certain things over and over again, because those are the issues that are important to me in my mind. And I can give you an example of this. The best example is like when I made my first music video, which was Behti Naar back in early 2000s. It was a song that got banned, and it dealt with relationships. It was dark. It was risque. It was provocative. The second music video I made was Khamaj, which was a gentle, nostalgic love story. The third video I made was Narena, which was a real journey into an alternative universe. So they were all three things that were told very differently, with different genres, but in a lot of ways they were telling the same stories. If you really dissect them in terms of thematic
Hmm.
elements,
Hmm.
and each way the character presented were kind of similar, even though the way they were told were very different. So I think in the future, whatever ideas are going through my head, there will obviously be some elements that are going to be similar, but I hope I cannot keep repeating myself. I hope I can do stuff that is new and different every time.
Acha, chale, let's talk about cinema as a medium, Saqib. Do you think it is a dying medium now with the advent of technology and subscription channels and all kinds of, very the kind of software that you would associate generally with going out of your house to watch in a cinema environment. Now you get to see it in your living rooms. So, do you think cinema has become redundant?
I think cinema, unfortunately, will become redundant. Uh, it's a very sad way of looking at things. But again, going out though, anyway, people will continue to go out to see films, but it won't be the norm. It'll be a niche thing. It'll be something you do on special occasions. Some people might do it regularly. But post COVID and post all these technological things, the transfer was already happening. लेकिन because of COVID तो ये और बहुत speed up
Quickly
हो
हो
गया.
गया जी.
So the cost of running cinemas is so high, and everything has to make business sense, right? So I think cinemas will still exist, but I think your revenue generation will be shared definitely by cinemas and online platforms and other ways of viewing content. तो वो तो definitely है. Cinema as an art form itself, regardless of whether you view it on the big screen or whether you view it on your home screen, that is also, I think, going to suffer, because the format, the 2.5 hour format or the 1.5 hour format, may soon be overtaken by the 5 episode format or the 10 episode format or the seasons format.
Hmm.
Because when people start watching stuff online, you want them captive for as long as possible. It makes much more sense to make something that's going to last over, 10 hours, that you're going to watch it, then you spend double that kind of money on something that is going to last just 2 hours, right? So the economics, that as your viewing habits change, as the venues where you watch entertainment change, then also the kind of stuff that you make will change as well. So I do think the conventional 1.5 to 2 hour film, watching in the cinema, of course, that's already endangered, and that itself, okay, whether they will be made, that's also endangered. I'm sorry, I'm using Urdu occasionally, but it's for Yulin magazine.
No, yeah, but I will, of course, translate it, and there will be a written blog, and then there will be a video. So it's all right. You can use Urdu language wherever you want.
One more, which I wanted to say, and you can edit this in, is that, after Baji, the next project, whichever I want to do, I will definitely want it to be very different. So the next thing I make might actually be a very art house thing with no songs and dance, because I don't want a stamp on me. So I'm equally attracted to all kinds of cinema. And I've done one, I might want to do another style of cinema next time. But like I said, themes, you will keep seeing recurring themes in my work, as it is with most filmmakers. Sorry, now coming back over here.
Gee, so away from cinema, I actually wanted to talk about storytelling. And you did talk about, the kind of storytelling that's very signature subcontinent. It has song, dance, it has melodrama, it has climax. Compare that to something, how we see the cinema and the storytelling in Iran, which is more subdued, more at an emotional level. So how what do you think, have we been able to carve an identity for Pakistani storytelling, be it through television, be it through web content, or be it through cinema?
Well, the thing is, let me tell you one thing, that all Iranian cinema is not like that. I mean, your most commercial Iranian cinema, their comedies and more are very different. This is the cinema that has won a lot of respect in the West, and I would say that cinema is kind of in the same tradition as our original TV work used to be. Unfortunately for Pakistan, because our cinema is very much like the cinema from across India, Bollywood, and we're competing in the same language, we really don't stand a chance of making our own identity through commercial cinema. Yes, our stories will resonate, but I don't know if we can have a Pakistani cinema, an identity of something called Pakistani cinema. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. But yes, we do have an identity of Pakistani drama. And that's because there's so much invested, and the basic credentials and the basic foundations of our drama were so strong from the way it was set up in PTV and the founding members of that world, that we've been able to carve a niche for ourselves. So globally, when you talk about kind of art and entertainment, and I'm talking about our diaspora or people who watch similar things, right? There's no global audience that watches everything, but say there is an audience that watches entertainment from Indian film industry. They will say cinema from Bollywood, drama from Pakistan. So that still exists. So I think we've managed to create an identity of telling stories through our style of drama. But film, unfortunately, we haven't, because we're still speaking in the same idiom as filmmakers from.
But our neighbors were on OTT channels, the subscription channels before us. So do you think there we are gonna again, go in and start imitating their software, or are we going to bring our own language?
That's the danger. Okay, jo India say the dramas and the television content that used to come out of India was very different than the way we were telling our stories, serials and all of that. But they were very quick to catch up. And while their main cable and all of that is still into the soap operas and all of that, the way they are telling their stories and the intelligence with which they are telling their stories and the themes which they're catering to on web platforms is very similar to the way we would do things for our television. And unfortunately, our television has become so stereotypical. And if we ever try to do a different theme, you are immediately stopped. Pembra on it, somebody comes and bans it, somebody complains. So any kind of experimentation of themes is just not happening on TV. And also because it's entirely in the hands of the private sector, it's become so commercial, kind of like the days of PTV when you could actually do something that was is no longer there because PTV didn't have to answer to anyone. Our Pakistan television, which was government owned. So we are, I think, in a moment of danger where we are going to lose our cultural voice, because our cinema will always be browbeaten by Indian cinema. Whether it is, it's like the Canadians and the Americans. Whether we're commercial cinema or even if we try and make films that look like Irani cinema, people will say, oh, that's like Irani cinema. Or if we try and make an offbeat film, people say, oh, that's like an Indian art film, right? I don't know what it would mean to have a Pakistani film. I think the only true, authentic Pakistani film language was a Punjabi film language. Nobody made Maula Jat other than Pakistan. So if you want to talk about authenticity, then your Pakistani Punjabi film is your authentic film language.
Yeah.
And that's something even the Indians loved and people around the world love. Nobody was able to do that. So that's with film. And if with TV, if we don't quickly open up and start adapting to change, that little benefit that we had over other world, other cultures, that's going to go. Already you see that Turkish content is so popular in Pakistan and around the world, right? Indian content is becoming so popular also because of all the web platforms. So we are in danger of losing that voice unless we open up and start taking chance.
And how do you see, whatever little content that's coming out from Pakistan on web channels? How do you see that? Do you think we are in the right direction?
As far as web channels are concerned, I mean, we're not on any web channels. Basically, the big global web channels that reach, so many countries and huge populations, they've just bought content that was not made for those web channels. For pittance, I know because my film Baji is also playing on Amazon, is that, so that is really not made for those platforms, and that's old content. So unfortunately, yeah, I mean, and the stuff that we're making now for smaller players like YouTube and for smaller, more regional or local OTT platforms which are coming up, the budgets are very low. The thinking is very stereotyped. It's a bad copy of a bad copy of a bad copy, unfortunately. Yes, some people are making good short films for international festivals, for local festivals. I think if you want to see good content in the future, you will have to talk about narrative content. I'm not talking about TikTok and all this great stuff coming out of there, skits, little bits, and that's where we're really doing well because that is authentic, fun, about content from the hearts and minds of your population. But if you talk about narrative content, then I think short films may be the place to see because that's where a lot of young people are making films. It's cheap to film, it's cheap to make them on your phone. It's easy to put on YouTube, send to festivals. I think that's the place to look for more authentic voices.
लेकिन उसकी monetization का there's no system ना.
There's no monetization thing, but then, filmmaking or being an artist, if you want to call that, you better be ready to starve because it's a passion, it's a bug. The bug that you need to get that venom out of your system, So
Right.
you have doing it till somehow you make it. So yeah.
Acha, Saqib, what's next for you? What are you planning to do next?
So I'm in a bit of a conundrum myself कि भैया क्या किया जाए because I can't see myself making something for Hum TV or Geo TV and ARY TV. I could, but on my own terms because we are spoiled. Of course, having been in advertising. So right now I'm just doing commercials, that's bread and butter. But for something more substantial, I really, I'm in the process of working on a couple of scripts for serials. Where they will go, I don't know, because we really don't have the platform. But I am working on those ideas because I think that is the way forward. And I'm working on a film script as well. But of course, we'll have to wait and see. So, it's a wait and see period. But I think right now, planning towards a web series, whatever the opportunity, allows, would be the best way to go forward.
But Saqib, isn't it true that the medium probably is to be considered first before you actually start looking, the kind of stories that you can tell through the medium?
Oh yeah, of course. So for example, the web series, I've already decided that the two web series stories that I'm working on, they will have to be web series, like 10 episode or 13 episode.
All right.
For digital. That could translate for television as well. If anybody wants to take those kind of risks and produce something that will, shake things up a bit. So I'm very clear on that. Film ideas. So I'm working on, okay, this will be 10, 11 episode thing, and this will be for like a 2-hour film or whatever.
अच्छा
I'm
साकिब
also
मुझे ये
working.
बताएं, आपने
Sorry.
खुद भी compromises की बात की, and you know, recently we also saw, you know, one film which you know was apparently not uh, what people thought it was, and then it was banned, and you know we still haven't seen it, and you know, uh, right. So do you as a filmmaker or as a storyteller ever impose any self censorship on yourself before actually, you know, and see, you know, if the society, if your receivers are ready to receive it
Yeah,
or not? Do you think in those terms?
you have to, when you're making those decisions, you have to pretty much decide who your audience is going to be and how much can you get away with that audience, right? Um, in the case of Baji, I knew that I wanted to reach out to a very wide audience, and I wanted, to make sure that I could only push them that much. I knew that if I push that audience a little more, that audience will reject that content.
Right.
So obviously, not self-censor, but I had to decide in my mind, okay, this is the film I want to make. It's for this audience, and this is the way it has to be. When we were doing music videos, it wasn't the case because after bana ke, you make it and you put it there. So I wasn't even thinking of it in that way. When I made my music videos, I was really thinking, okay, which is the best um, execution of an idea that is my interpretation of this piece of music. And so I just went ahead and did it. I didn't even think, and I didn't care. And yes, a lot of times I even put my own money into it, but it was okay. So when you're making a film, remember, people have to pay to come and see it. So then it becomes very, very different. And when you're making something for television, you have to be very clear on what those camera rules and all are going to be. So yes, you have to think about that. And I think in the case of the film that you're talking about, and Sarmad's work, excellent work, I personally don't think he ever thought he was going to offend anyone, because the film itself, the theme is not controversial. It may make people think about common cultural practices and about where we are in a society and the hypocrisy of our society. But it was never meant to be anything that would offend anyone. And I'm sure it's a completely non-offensive piece of work. But unfortunately, it got caught up in issues that were much beyond what that film was.
Yeah.
And it became important for that. But yes, I think any filmmaker, because film is the most, is that one art form in which you require an audience at the other end that has to pay, because it's an expensive art form. I can write a book and not care what people have to say. Okay, fine, I might be thrown in jail for being a certain way, writing a certain thing. But for film, you have to be very careful. And I think by and large, we have most liberties here. The only real thing you can't talk about is religion, because you don't want to offend anyone. But I think that's the case even in India. Like people, you can't make anything possibly offend any religious sensibilities. But then we made a film like Khuda Ke Liye that was very critical of the predominant, a very popular way of thinking at the time. It's the first film that took on like religion in our culture and the way it's used in our society head on, and people loved that. So yeah, there are decisions we have to make, and it's touch and go.
Okay, Saqib, a few light questions. If we break into your playlist, what are the 3 most played songs?
Okay. Ironically, I don't listen to music a lot, but you'll definitely find Noor Jahan up there for some of her Punjabi songs, because that's the music I grew up with. You'll definitely find 80s pop music, because that's something I grew up with. And I think you'll find some very modern electronic house music, because that's the music that keeps me going at this age.
Great. Thank you so much, Saqib. Thank you for your time and the lovely chat. And I really enjoyed talking to you. And